All right, so let's break down Rocky Mountain Blues. The first thing we notice is that it is in the key of B flat, and we use mostly the same chords, but we're also going to integrate some new harmonic substitutions. So B flat now is our tonic, our one chord. And as with all blues, almost all blues progressions, we go right to the 4 chord in the second bar, which now is E flat. And then back to the tonic. And then just for a little variety, we just go up a half step, B7, back to B flat 7, and then into a tritone sub, E7, going into E flat 7 in the 5th bar. Then we could do our sharp 4 diminished chord that we saw in our very first blues in F. And then we do another kind of turnaround to get to the 6th chord, which would be 1, 2, 3, 6, then 2, 5, and then the standard turnaround for the last 2 bars. B flat, G7, 6th chord, or you can think of it as a 5 of 2. But in this case, it's like a dominant cycle. Okay, so looking at the bass line, again, the first chorus is a walking 4 bass line, and then the second chorus we add some chords, just like we've done before, but with a few twists and turns in the road here. So the first 4 bars, everything that we've seen from the previous 2 etudes in terms of kicking it up a little bit, using the pull-off to nowhere technique, and also the adjacent strings technique. So again, just mute out those 8th notes. So everything there is something that we've seen before. In the second 4 bars, we've got a new triplet rhythm with just a bass line. So we saw that in the last blues, alternating between a bass chord and bass note. Now we'll just use it in our bass line, which of course bass players love to do. So if you take a look at measure 8 on beat 4, we're just outlining a G by playing the root, 5th, and octave. So with your right hand, the way that I like to play it is middle, index, thumb. And by the way, when you're playing these quarter note walking bass lines, you can experiment with how you articulate it. In other words, you'll notice by now that I don't adopt a bass posture or anything with my right hand. My right hand just falls right into the guitar naturally, so I'm not at risk of any, carpal tunnel or sustained, nerve trauma or cumulative trauma or anything like that. It's nice and comfortable, and I'll just alternate between playing bass notes with my thumb or maybe my first and second fingers. It's just a slightly different tone. Get a little bit more edge when you use your fingers because, of course, now your fingernails are hitting the strings. But it's up to you. And generally, at the end of the day, I'll use both, depending on whatever finger is there at the moment on the string. So leading into bar 5, measures 5 through 8, we have basically a single note line with a couple of kicks, a couple of pull-offs to nowhere, one pull-off to nowhere, and then followed by the triplet rhythm. So let's take a look at that from measure 5 and the E flat 7. 1, 2, 3, and. So I'm fingering it again, middle, index, thumb. Okay? And then we see the same thing, almost the same type of figure in measure 11. And this is a triplet rhythm that's preceded by 2 eighth notes. And you hear bass players do this all the time. In this case, we're outlining a G7 chord. So there's different ways that bass players articulate this. But in this example, we're going to play the octave. And then into the triplet, we'll play, since it's a dominant 7th chord, we'll play the flat 7, 5, 1. And you can choose to pull off those first 2 notes between the octave and the flat 7 if you want. Or you can pluck them, whatever you choose. It's just a slight difference in articulation. It's all the sound that you're going for. I like them both. But generally speaking, I like to pull them off, Okay? So again, those last 2 measures of the first chorus, the 1, 6, 2, 5 turnaround, are as followed. 3, 4. Okay? Okay, so it's just a nice little, way to propel the rhythm forward and create something interesting rhythmically speaking. All right, let's take a look at the second chorus now. We dive right in with a B flat 13 chord, right up into the E flat. And this is basically the same exercise that we saw back in our primer when we started moving between one chord and the next. This is exactly those same two bars, same rhythm, same chords and everything. But now you can see it in context of a blues. So a lot of the work that we're doing with our bass line is with the index finger of your fretting hand. You have to get used to just kind of playing all those chromatic and moving bass lines with just the index finger, because again, you're going to need 2, 3, and 4 to finger your chord voicings. So that's maybe a nice thing to practice when you're working through this and other etudes, is just to isolate the bass line and see if you can play the bass line by itself using only the first or second fingers or whatever fingers you're going to use. So in this case, we have, so maybe we've got 1, 1, 2, 2, and the reason why I'm switching to 2 here, I could keep that 1, but especially on the D, which is our chromatic approach to E flat, I'm using that middle finger because that's going to move nicely into the E flat 9. And that's how I'll finger that E flat 9 chord, with the middle finger in the bass. So that's something to keep in mind as you're working out adding chords on top of your bass lines. If I were to just play the bass line by itself, I could use just the first finger or even use all 4 fingers. But now I have to keep in mind that I'm going to be eventually resolving to this E flat 9 chord. So the best way to get into that would just be kind of using this pivot finger, middle finger move up, and then 1, 3, and 4 just will naturally fall into place. Okay? So again, that move is B flat 13, 1, 1, 2, and now my fingers are getting ready to get into the E flat 9 chord. Same thing. Moving on from there, we go down to the low G with an index finger, and then I'm going to keep the first finger in the bass because I'm going to need to set up that B flat 13 with an A 13. So that means I need 2, 3, and 4 for the chord. So I'm just going to do this. B 13 again. Now that's kind of a cool little move right there at the end of that measure. We're doing another tritone substitution, in this case an E7, approaching our E flat 9 chord by a half step above. And this uses a nice little triplet figure that integrates the bass and the chord together. So that whole measure is this, 3, 4. So we just have 1 and 2 and then we move into our triplets. So if you notice in the notation, the bass line is playing a triplet figure with 1 eighth note and 2 eighth notes folded into a quarter note. So instead of da da da, we just have da da, and the third eighth note is part of the quarter note. But it appears in the chord, with that third partial of the triplet appears in the chord with the dotted quarter note figure there. So it's just kind of like a nice, cool little thing to land on for a second. So the triplet actually is this: bass, bass, chord. Leading into it from 2. And then that whole measure would be, and then we're into the fourth bar. And again, we can just kind of keep on that E diminished 7th chord. It's like a stationary low E note while we move the chords around. It's just a nice little effect. And then we're back home for our turnaround. Chromatic approach up to the D minor 7. Now that last chord there, G13 flat 9, this is the 4th beat of measure 20. This is actually a chord voicing for G13 flat 9, but there's no root in it. And that's okay, because it's appearing on beat 4, and it's kind of a transitional chord, and it's another example of that. We don't have to always hear the root on the downbeat of that particular chord or anywhere. But what really is happening here is there's a melody that's going on. So if we take a look at measure 20, just the bass line, we're starting on a D, F, G, F, and then we're going right down the scale starting in measure 21. So again, there's another example of this melodic arc. In this case, we're just moving down the scale, and it's nice. So we're going up, and then we're continuing to move down instead of interrupting that flow of the melody by playing the root of the C. You can hear how it sounds. That doesn't sound like it connects very smoothly. Instead, we'll go from the F down a whole step to the E flat, which is a chord tone of C minor. And you can see in your music it says C minor 9 over E flat. So it looks like an E flat major 7 chord, but we're actually considering that to be the 2 chord, a C minor 7 in first inversion. And the reason why we're doing that is to keep this melodic flow going in the bass line. So we have this finally home. So the way that we can achieve that is by using chord inversions, and it's totally fine to do that. So from the D minor 7 again, you can see how the chords voice lead from one to the next, the bass line connects smoothly, and we'll just walk our way down to the root of the C minor. Now we're home. Keep going down to the B flat. Now we need to play an F chord, but it makes sense to have the A in the bass. So what I'm going to do is use the trick of playing the open A string, not only because that's the right note to play, but that buys me time to play the chord that I want, which is back to an F13. So instead of playing this and just jumping from the B flat, this is what it would sound like. That doesn't sound very smooth. What I can do is connect the C minor 7 to the F13 via the third. So B flat, A. And then that buys me some time to get down to my 13 chord in position. And that's exactly what happens on the first beat of measure 22. Now I can alter that chord a little bit by putting in a sharp 5 in there, so you get this nice movement. Okay, so there's melodic arcs happening both in the bass line and in the chord figures. So from measure 21, we have open, open. And that's, we're back to the 1, but sometimes it's nice to just use a sus figure just for a little, variation, little contrast. And then we'll end it off with a nice B flat 9 sharp 11 chord to give us that kind of C over B flat sound.